Give it a minute and then I'll make a well, I might as well just start. By way of introduction, VETASSESS is the largest skills assessment body that assesses migrants in Australia. So what we essentially do is look at individual qualifications, we look at experiences, and then we make a determination whether they meet the skill requirements or not. We do this for a number of trade and non-trade occupations. 350 plus non-trades and roughly 30 trades, so that includes your plumbers, electricians, and cooks, chefs, marketing specialists, agricultural scientists, the whole lot. Now, being the largest skills assessment body and doing this now since 1999, we gained a lot of wealth and experience in assessing and making a determination of international skills against the Australian framework. So we wanted to then apply all that knowledge in the refugee skills assessment space. Now, in my presentation today, I want to give you a bit of context. We've heard about refugee skills yesterday. We heard about the session earlier today as well, where they are focusing on refugees and doing something in terms of digital credentializing or recognizing the skills of refugees. So just want to share the Australian perspective of what's happening in this space, what are some of the challenges, and what more can be done as well. So just a quick snapshot of the refugee status in Australia. We've got what we call an Australian migration program. It's an annual program. It has X number of spots available under skills categories and under family categories, but there is also a humanitarian section. So this year alone, in the current program, we have spots available for 20,000 people to come into Australia, make it their home on a humanitarian visa basis. All right. Hello. Oh. Thank you. Sorry to the three members at the back. I'll do a quick repeat. So I did say that I'm from VETASSESS Australia, and VETASSESS is the largest skills assessment body that supports migration into Australia. So when you want to migrate, you need to have your skills assessed before you can start your visa journey. And VETASSESS has more than 400 occupations available on the Australian migration list. So we make a determination of individuals' qualifications and their experience against the requirements of the skill set of the occupation. Once we give them a positive assessment, they can start their visa journeys. So why are we talking about refugees today? Well, VETASSESS assesses skilled migrants, but we have been commissioned by the Australian government based on our experience to apply that skills and knowledge base to refugees as well. I won't do a third repeat, huh? So today, to give you a context of what's happening in Australia in terms of refugee skills assessments, the role that VETASSESS has played, some of the challenges and things that we need to do, and perhaps use the GDN network as well as a pathway of collaboration moving forward. So in terms of the refugees now, Australia has a migration program and it fixes the number of spots available in any given migration year. Majority of the places go to skilled migrants and then their family members, but there is also a humanitarian cohort. So in the current program, we have 20,000 spots allocated for refugees and humanitarian visas as well. Now, in terms of, if you look at those context in numbers, based on per capita income, 1 in 10 migrants in Australia settled in Australia is a refugee. So by that means, it does become a very generous country in terms of refugee settlement. We've, since the start of this program, way back in 1977, we now have 950,000 refugees that are settled in Australia. And the streams go up and flow. The geopolitics, Australia is not immune to the geopolitics of migration, refugee settlements as well. So you've had government fine-tuning its policies from time to time, but since post-COVID, we've seen an increased appetite from the Australian government to do something about refugees. And basically, it's a skill set that is readily available in the country. So why not harness that skill set to the Australian economic advantage, which also works in settling refugees as well in the Australian economic workforce. So where do the refugees in Australia mostly come from? It's typical of what other countries would receive as well. We heard about the Afghani refugees this morning, and one of the issues that was raised was the lack of credentials for recognizing refugees that have. Australia has been sort of fortunate in that regard because it made a special arrangement to accommodate Afghani refugees once the Taliban takeover happened. And therefore, they were given time and opportunity, enough heads up or leave to collect the documents and come to Australia. Majority of the Afghani refugees that we have assessed for qualifications, in fact, 100% of that cohort presented the qualification documents, but which obviously is not the case for all other refugees as well. But in that case, we were able to recognize their qualifications and issue them an Australian equivalency. So that's a service that the Australian government provides to refugees free of service. If they have overseas qualifications, you give it an Australian equivalency free of charge. Now, in terms of where they settle, the refugees no different to our skilled migrants. Skilled migrants mostly settle in New South Wales or Victoria. That's where you have the migrant hubs. That's where you have maximum opportunities. The refugees too settle mainly in New South Wales and Victoria, and then followed by other parts of Australia. Now, this is a good story to share. So one of the regional towns in the state of Victoria, Meagre, started a duck business. Love a duck, as it's called, and they were struggling to find workers to work. So they went to a local settlement agency, AIMS. AIMS deals with migrants and helps them with English language mainly, but now they're trying to extend their scope of service. So they said, would you have anyone through your agency that would be willing to work for us? We're struggling to find local workforce. And therefore, they managed to get 4 refugees to work at Love a Duck. This was way back in 2009. Today, there are 65 workers at Love a Duck. They're all refugees from Myanmar, the Korean community, and they have their families settled in Nahil as well. And a few of them have also started up their own small business. Now, further on, the story continues, but I'll tell you later. Now, also in the last census that was conducted, 5% of Nahil population is now Korean. So, which is a beautiful and a significant gesture. This is important, and this is what we heard from the Norway presentation yesterday: aging population, right? And Japan is not presenting, but we know Japan has a dire aging population. Australia is not immune. But if you just look and put this into context, the working age group of the refugees presents a much bigger opportunity right now than the local born Australia. So there is a big skill pool to tap into. And this is what the Australian government's attention is now being drawn. Now, I explained before that we assess skilled migrants. VETASSESS is a skilled migration agency. We look at individual qualifications. We look at their experience. A carpenter will be assessed by a carpenter. A chef will be assessed by a chef to determine that you do have the skill set to work in that profession. A marketing professional will be assessed by a marketing expert to say, yes, you are a marketing expert, you can come and work in Australia. That is what the skilled migration program allows for skilled migrants to go to. But the same does not happen for refugees, because when they come in, they are determined on the basis of their circumstances, the criteria that applies, and one of them is not a skills assessment component, and that shouldn't be. However, we feel that there is a need to recognize the skills that refugees bring into it. This is just talking about the labour outcomes as well. So obviously now, just by way of example, I was in a cab, and the cab driver was a migrant when I called. This is in Australia, in Melbourne. Was from a country and has come as a refugee to Australia. And I said, well, what are your qualifications? I was a dentist back there in my country. So I've got all my qualifications, everything. I can work as a dentist. I can work as a dental hygienist if you want me to. I can also be a nursing assistant. I've got all the qualifications and the experience. And I said, why are you driving a taxi? Because when I got the visa, someone pointed me to a truck driving job, and I said, yep, okay, that's fine. I need money to earn. So, yep, I'll start truck driving. And then I found it very hectic, and the schedules didn't quite work for me. I wanted flexibility. So I moved into cab driving. But I said, do you know that the government offers different programs for you to be able to access and get your qualifications recognized? I said, no. So I think this is one of the barriers to face, that there are some support systems and networks available, but how do you make it readily available and spread the awareness amongst the cohort society? These are all the programs that you can access. So hence the labor outcomes for refugees are much lower compared to the skilled migrants or even native-born Australians. And of course, the good story is that the labor outcomes are improving over time, but it's taken 20 years to reach parity. So I think we need better outcomes fast. And that's something that VETASSESS is now embarking on in terms of advocacy to the Australian government. Also in terms of the second generation has much better outcomes, which are almost at par with the Australian born, which is again something a good aspect of the whole story as well. Now, the primary skilled migrants, when they come in, they have been assessed based on their qualifications. They have been assessed based on their experience. The refugees also have qualifications and they also have valid experience, but because they don't have a recognition to showcase any of that experience, they do not employment to the skilled migrants, and they will be obviously working much below the skill level for those areas. So this is further education. More likely that refugees will be enrolled in further education compared to the skilled migrants as well. This is not to say that skilled migrants don't enroll in further education. And I will come a bit to that later as well, as to where are the gaps in terms of skilled migration not meeting the requirements, let alone the ones that come in on. Continuing the Lava Duck story. So one of the couple workers that signed up to work at Lava Duck, this is their son, Hal Liu. So he's also from the Korean community. And he was very interested in automotive. So he secured a job at a local Halfway Motors, and he was enrolled in an apprenticeship through his employer. It was a 4-year apprenticeship. When he finished it, he even got an award for Apprenticeship of the Year. He even got commendation. And now, since then, and you can Google it, he's moved across to Bendigo in Victoria and opened up his own motor garage. And it's thriving pretty well. It's called Hal's Motors. So the point I made earlier that we need to make better use of the skills that refugees bring in faster. And how do we do that? We include everyone into all the migrants, regardless of whether they have come in via the skilled pathway or not, but everyone should be included into skills mechanisms. So what we do in terms of skills assessments for migrants, we look at the technical skills, we look at their employability skills, we look at their technical skills, but we aren't currently doing it for refugees except in pockets. We do it in pockets. So a government-funded pilot here targeting refugees, we do that end-to-end process of recognizing their skills. But once the pilot finishes, it doesn't turn into a system. It doesn't turn into an ongoing thing. I think that's where the opportunity is. We also issue digital badges. Now, there was a conversation, a talk was about the formal and the informal, but there's got to be recognition of the informal as well. Digital badges, I think, offers an opportunity for recognition of the informal, and you don't necessarily have to put it in a structure. So something that's being done in the prisons in Australia is where education is being imparted in prisons. We are now introducing on the back of that education digital badges to inmates. Once they are released, they are also educated how to use those digital badges to their advantage in the community if they wish to pursue a career as well. So I think there is a way of making the digital or the technology work in a way that it accommodates both the formal as well as the informal structures of learning. This is the project that we worked on. One of the pilots we worked on in 2015, the government commissioned VETASSESS to undertake skills assessments for 28 refugees, and they selected 13 from New South Wales, 15 from Victoria. The Victorian ones were machinists and welders, and from New South Wales it was the hairdressers. So VETASSESS undertook a skills assessment, which is looking at their experience, making the determination. It's a combination of recognition of prior learning. It's a combination of practical assessments. You ask them technical questions. And you also, before you start the process, you train them as to how to undergo and go through an interview. You also help them with the language skills they need to be able to. Now, this is very important aspect to remember. You can do everything for the refugees in terms of creating big systems and with all good intents, but unless and until it meets their core basic needs. So the conversation starts with them. What are the barriers and challenges they face? The first and foremost challenge that the refugees have listed to us is language. They're very hesitant to be interviewed in an English language, right? So providing them that basic support through the AIMS institutions in Australia, basic English language support before they go through an interview process. Once they go through the interview process, we make a determination of their skills to identify this is the skill set where you sit, but this is where the gaps. In terms of the gap, then we refer them to training providers. Now, this is all government funded, so they aren't paying a cent to go through this service. Once they go through the training and they finish the training, at the end of the training, they are provided Australian qualification. And then they are referred or they are introduced to the employers and taken through the interview process. On the back of this pilot, 25 were successfully employed. All of them received a qualification. Majority of them received a Certificate 3, which is the most popular standard qualification for trade professionals in Australia. And few received a Certificate 2 as well. As you can see at the bottom, 2 of the hairdressers open up their own salon as well. And they employ refugees and humanitarian worker visa holders in that salon as well. Now, the other project we worked on, the government post-COVID, Australia decided, yes, we needed to recover, and there is obviously, we reopened the doors to migration. We had the longest COVID lockdown, Anthony will agree with me here, in the world. And once the doors to migration opened, the Australian government realized that you can't always rely on skilled migration. There is a lot of expertise onshore that hasn't been tapped into, including the refugees, humanitarian visa holders. Therefore, the government introduced 3 pilots. The first pilot was aimed at skilled migrants. I won't spend time on that. The second pilot was aimed at anyone who has come as a migrant into Australia but has not been recognised for their skills. Therefore, the government then incentivized all the assessing authorities, relevant assessing authorities for different occupations, including VETASSESS, to offer free skills assessment in the chosen occupations. So Australia identified these are the occupations where we have shortage. And if there are refugees that have skill sets in these occupations, we will offer them a free recognition of their skills and give them a qualification based on their skills. So we undertook that pilot as well. And you can see the outcomes at the bottom as well. 84 were gainfully employed, which is up from 59 before, but even 65% of them had an uplift in terms of the jobs. And that was on the basis of the skills recognition. 69% got an uplift in the jobs from where they were as a result of this. So definitely this has proven, and this is a very recent pilot, and the results have just been released earlier this year by the government. So clearly this is a great opportunity now for the government to leverage on the results of this pilot to broaden the scope of this. Employability skills. Now this definitely hasn't been talked about much at this forum, but The pilot 3 was focused on employability skills. The governments realized that, okay, sometimes you have all these people with qualifications, experience, great qualification experience. You have lots of engineers coming into Australia, and they have the relevant experience, but they're working as truck drivers or forklift drivers, so way below their skill levels. And based on survey or data, it was identified that the missing gap or the missing link was the soft skills. And the Australian government, through Jobs and Skills Council, has developed a framework of soft skills, 10 soft skills, which they have identified. I think in the green bag at the top left, you can see what those soft skills are. But these are the soft skills that were identified as core to enabling better employment outcomes, in addition to the technical experience and the qualification. So the pilot was aimed at doing a skills assessment against the soft skills for individuals who already had qualifications. Why I'm talking about this here is that we think this also, in addition to everything else we do, can be applied in the refugee space. So do a determination of the skills, experience, but also of the soft skills. But the process entails doing a self-assessment from the individual to say, this is where I think I stand in terms of my soft skills. And then they will go through a coaching exercise with VETASSESS to determine and moderate those scores. And based on areas identified as opportunities of development, they will be then referred to relevant training partners. Of the list there, I know it's all clubbered together, but the one I'll draw your attention to is learning, which is in the second last row. It is learning to learn. This was identified as the biggest area and opportunity. And maximum students were enrolled in learning to learn. And so if you look at the micro-credential in itself, the learning to learn essentially teaches you how to learn in a different language, how to learn in a different work context. So a chippy in Australia is not understood as a chippy in India. They would say chippy is a chips, packet of chips. Are you referring to chips? No, chippy is a carpenter. That's what we're talking about. So the learning to learn actually helps develop those skills as well. So this was a very great initiative on behalf of the government, and we're glad that we actually got to experience firsthand as to how the process works and what are the outcomes that can potentially be achieved. So what we are advocating in the refugee space is that we combine the pilots in terms of pilot 2 and pilot 3 and offer that as a full suite of services that can be offered to refugees in Australia. Digital badges, we started, and this is again another important concept and just another dimension. A lot has been talked about digital badges being issued for different cohorts at this session as well. We originally started it with the intent that when migrants come to Australia, I'm a migrant into Australia, and when I migrated in 2007, based on my qualifications and experience, I did not know what to do. I did not know where to go. So there is a government agency called the Centrelink, and I went to Centrelink and said, how do I find a job? And they said, look, that's a computer. You can use that computer and look for jobs in various job sites. So essentially, when migrants come into the country, they need a lot of hand-holding as well, regardless of whether they come with a whole package of qualifications and skills. But when you're coming into a new country, it's new lengths. You do require hand-holding. You need a bit of guidance. You need a bit of direction. We always look at Canada as doing it much better than compared to where Australia is. But Australia is also now trying to get better at doing this. What we saw was that if we assess roughly upwards of 50,000 migrants every year, prospective migrants every year to come into Australia. We use that now as an opportunity to, on the back of a positive skills assessment, issue them with a free digital badge. So for a marketing professional, the Marketing Institute of Australia is the peak body. We've collaborated with them. On the back of the positive skills assessment from VETASSESS, they get an industry and VETASSESS co-branded digital skills badge which says you're a qualified, certified marketing professional recognized by the Marketing Institute of Australia. And not only that, they also get free membership with the Marketing Institute to start it. So what this does is it introduces them to the peak body that they need to be engaging with once they are in Australia. They don't have to go around searching, who do I talk to? Now they know they're already connected to Marketing Institute. Marketing Institute is already sending information. Once you land in Australia, this is how you navigate through the industry as well. So the concept itself, as it is applied to the skilled migrants at this stage, we are expanding it to the whole suite of 400 occupations. And that's where we're collaborating with equals. You heard from Anthony, who's back as well. So we're looking forward to elaborating this across the skilled migrant space, but moving forward, we're also going to do this for refugees as well. So how this approach will work is essentially they undergo a skills assessment, and we will be introducing them to the relevant industry bodies where they need to be connected with. That digital badge will be sort of your hand-holding to the industry and pursuing career pathways from there. So just some statistics. We presented on the digital badges last year, if you remember, and from the presentation, we at that time, the uptake was a bit under 3, and it's gone to over 8. So it's significantly picked up, and this is only in the 4 industries. As soon as we expand it to the 200 plus industries, we reckon that will go way up. And there is now the acceptance rate looks 61. You might wonder why is the acceptance rate only 61%. This is a digital badge that is given to the individuals as a freebie. So it's not something that they asked for. It's not something that they expected as part of the skills assessment. It's a value add that we have added on the back, and it's optional. They can choose to have it, they can choose to use it. But also, mind you, at the time that we offer the digital badge, the migrants may not have even started their visa journey. So they might still be 2 or 3 or 4 years away, but we still introduce them to the process, we introduce them to the peak body regardless. So what are some of the barriers? And the barriers in terms of accessing what's there in terms of for refugees, but also even if they are able to access, utilizing what's available. So what are some of the barriers in those spaces as well? As I mentioned, the pilots that were introduced. The first pilot was targeting hairdressers, and it was targeting machinists and welders. Why not just do it all across? Why not making an open-ended any occupation that refugees and humanitarian visa cohorts present? Let's make it much broader, because if you cast the net wider, you will find out that there is a diversity of skills. There are graphic designers, and there is a dental hygienist as well, and they were not considered as part of those pilots. So I think that is one of the limitations. Lack of understanding, as I gave you the example of the cab driver, that they had no understanding that there is a lot that is currently readily available, but how do I navigate that? And I'll show you a bit of the roadmap of what's happening in Australia in terms of what are the different pockets that are operating in isolation in Australia and how we need to bring them all together. So this is what we have to navigate through. There are different bodies at the Commonwealth, at the state level, private agencies, public funded agencies that are doing, and of course now VETASSESS is doing pilots on behalf of the government. There is no one-stop shop for refugees and humanitarian visa holders to say, this is the starting point for me in Australia, and this is how I navigate through, and this is how I go through in the state of Victoria or in the state of New South Wales. This is how I access those programs. So what we are trying to do as an initiative is to advocate with the Australian government to bring this all together. And we being the largest skills assessment body, we feel that we are in that fortunate position that we have that accessibility and those networks to be able to help the government enable this as well. So just continuing on some of the various English proficiency, I already talked about that. So a lot of support that goes into English language program, and currently it's there are 2 programs running in Australia successfully. One is the AIMS, AIMS, and the other one is AIMS. So they're both focused on English language for migrants and for professionals with migrants. Then also have to be mindful that unlike skill, even for the skilled professionals, it is a journey. It does take an impact if they have to wait 2 years, 4 years. They've invested a lot of money. But let's look at the refugees and the extenuating circumstances that they have fled to come to Australia, could be on a boat as well, and they made it alive. The psychological impact that the journey has on the refugees that land in Australia. So alongside the technical and the digital badges or the English language or the employability skills, what is very important is providing them the mental and the OHS support at all times. So looking after their welfare is also extremely important, and that's something that we have brought in as a recommendation to the government. Recognition of qualifications and prior experience is one of the biggest areas, and I've talked about that today. In terms of lost or inaccessible documentation, we heard about that before as well at some of the sessions, that refugees will not bring in documentation or they don't have. Now, in terms of VETASSESS approach, where they do not have documentation, we apply the technical interviews and the practical assessment, but we also look at credential verification. If they have, now this will not always be possible, and this was a small pilot, so in this case was okay, was doable. But where they have a qualification that has been obtained, but they don't have documentation, we actually contact the higher education bodies of the country as a ward to seek and source that information. Sometimes we are fortunate and lucky, we get this information, and sometimes we're not. But in circumstances where we are not able to validate the qualifications, we rely on the practical assessment of their skills. So they are asked a series of technical questions that have been based on a technical question bank developed in consultation with the industry bodies. And based on that, we make a determination whether they demonstrate and they have the skill sets or not, they can do the job or not. And if not, where are the gaps that can be? I think that just goes on to the use of the barriers, but poor workplace English is something that is a big struggle for refugees. Now, something that we've been advocating to the government is that when they initiate programs or pilots aimed at refugees and humanitarian visa cohorts, make sure they are in different languages, not just in English. So connect with the refugees in there, try and connect with the refugees. We have data on refugees coming into Australia. We know what backgrounds, we know what languages as well. So making sure that we are communicating in the local language first before we communicate in English. And helping them understand and navigate through the labour market. And that's where some of the initiatives like hand-holding, introducing them to the industries and the peak bodies is very helpful. One of the initiatives that we also run with Victorian State Government is Overseas Qualifications Recognition Service for refugees. So what we do is go around doing seminars, and these are free seminars they are held in communities and councils where there is a large refugee and humanitarian visa cohorts. So we will go in those communities and offer them webinars and free seminars on what are the services they can access in terms of free qualification recognition. And we've had a significant uptake in the last 3 years from refugees with qualifications from overseas. The lack of network is obviously another barrier that they always need to overcome. And the way of addressing that is also in providing them more information, but also supporting and supporting them by creating networks. So agencies such as skills assessing authorities, digital credential providers, agencies that have that bandwidth of being able to support some agencies should come together and provide the network support for these cohorts. There is also a bit of an Australian employer bias that we deal with when it comes to refugees and gaining employment, successful employment. So there has been a bit of advocacy work that has been going on that front as well, is to gain some confidence from the Australian employers. And the way of doing this has been by way of incentivizing the employers as well. That if they were to access from the refugee or the humanitarian cohort through, there would be some subsidized support that is provided to those employers. So that has taken up. I think it's a slow start. And once you start investing in that system, gaining confidence, and when you start developing and building that confidence and you see that working, you would hope that this just goes and becomes into a BAU. Immigration and visa status is another challenge that we are dealing with. So even for the refugees in Australia, there are a number of visa categories. Every visa category has its own limitations and restrictions. If you're in this visa category, you can do this, but you can't do this. If you're in this visa category, you can only work for 20 hours. If you're in this visa category, you cannot go in this state or that state. So that is also something that, of course, that is not within the hands of VETASSESS to be able to modify. But this is a recommendation that we have made to the Australian government that if you really want those pilots to be successful and turn something into a systematic approach to addressing the lack of recognition of skills for refugees, then these are all the barriers, including the visa system, that you need to be able to work through as well. So I won't elaborate too much. I think we have elaborated. This is more about the barriers that I talked about. And I think I've talked through the presentation of how you turn those barriers into opportunities and make things work. Similarly, about the using barriers as well. I'll leave that there on the side. If there's any question, anything that sparks a question, feel free to ask. But yes. So the pilot was very recent, yes, and it has just been finished. And we have made the first suite of recommendations have been adopted into the review of the pilot, which is a good starting step, but still, there is still a long way. This is the start of a journey. Yeah. Yes. Mm. 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 Yes. So this is where the government, and if as an assessing authority we were to go and the medical association to accepting doctors from the subcontinent, regardless that you don't have mutual recognition frameworks, obviously that's problematic. We're not seen as the professions. But this is where the dental hygienist example that not the dental hygienists as such, but dentists were included in pilot 2 of the government. So they did negotiate, the government did negotiate with the Dental Association of Australia to accommodate any dentist that comes to pilot 2 and gets their skills recognized. So of the success rate that you saw there on the pilot 2 slide, that does include a few dentists as well. So I think in that regard, yes, you do need the government. Yeah. In terms of the terminology, the migrants, yes. So in Australia, they're all categorized as migrants, but then within the migrants, you have skilled migrants, you have family members who come in with the skilled migrants, and then you have the humanitarian. So that is the humanitarian. Yes, second. So the digital badges I just talked about. So let's say we've got a refugee who is a marketing professional, or let's take a different example for a change, cafe restaurant manager. We have collaboration with the Peak Body, the Cafe Restaurant Agency of Australia, and we've determined with them what is the skill set that a cafe restaurant manager needs to demonstrate. So they may hold a qualification that we may not be able to verify, and it's not mandatory in Australia, for the general professionals to demonstrate a qualification, but experience is more important. Therefore, based on the expertise that's provided to us by the industry as to what we should be looking for, we will then make a determination of the individual whether they have the skill sets presented that's expected of a cafe restaurant manager. They will be issued a digital badge to say, you are a qualified cafe restaurant manager, and these are the skills that you have demonstrated. No, thank you. Thanks for attending.